College football starts in less than a week. Hallelujah. I have been just amped for this to take place, but there's some business that we have to get started with before the season starts, and that's going to be our top 10. We'll discuss that. We'll discuss some recent firings at ESPN uh, and the FedEx Cup, which is the first round of the playoffs in the PGA Tour. My name is Ed Smith, and this is Total Sports Talk Beyond the Lights. Welcome, everybody. This is Total Sports Talk Beyond the Lights. I'm your host this evening, Ed Smith, and with me is David Street.
What's up, everybody? And what's up, Ed? How are you doing?
I am pumped. I've been watching some preseason and some baseball and all kinds of stuff, and I'm just amped because this is the greatest time of the year. This going into fall, I can't wait for the rest of it. Just inject it into my veins.
Yeah,
So,
well, when
yep.
it comes to college football, I mean, obviously, you have more of a reason to look forward to your team than I do, my team. But an advantage of being in my position is that, let's say that Florida does have a good season. Okay, like it's pretty highly unlikely. Okay, but let's say that we do, then it basically makes all the arguing on Twitter, on socials, pretty much worth it because we can prove how wrong everybody was about us, man. And the truth is, like, you never really know how your team is going to do. You have an idea, you have a feeling of how they're going to do, but you don't really know until they hit the field. So I look forward to it every single year, even though I know my team is, probably not going to do the best, but we'll see. We'll see.
Well, and another advantage that you have is when you absolutely do not want to keep rewatching the game that the Gators play, you can just turn on UCF and you'll watch a more recent national champion than what the Gators have been.
Hey, listen, okay? UCF will never be champions. They will never be a Big Four in Florida, and this is probably going to be one of the very few times I defend Florida State and Miami. But UCF will never be in the same caliber as Florida State or Miami.
Oh, we have those schools around here too, namely Houston. Uh, thinking that they were something in the late 80s, early 90s. But that's a little bit of a history thing. And they were fun teams if you want to go back on YouTube and watch how today's passing game was invented. It
Mm.
was truly something to behold.
Didn't what wasn't Tom Herman the head coach at Houston at one point, Ed?
Yes,
Okay.
Tom Herman took the Cougars to a bowl game, and at that point, Texas was fed up with Charlie Strong. They were like, "This is the new next messiah of college football coaching that has legacy toward the University of Texas." So
And,
they were like, "Let's jump on that."
well, and it seemed to work at first because your first year, I think y'all went 10-4, so you had an excellent first year record. You just really couldn't do anything after that.
Yeah, the the highlight of the Tom Herman era was the bowl game against the Georgia Bulldogs,
Yeah.
and they're we're finally going to see the rematch of that game play out this year,
Well, I
whether it
think
be one time, two times, or even three times. It's possible.
I think we can all agree that when and Ed, I know you're very particular about this, but how do you pronounce the name of y'all's mascot? Y'all's live mascot?
Bevo.
Bevo. Yeah, I think when Bevo went after Uga like that, I think we could all see that was a harbinger of what was about to happen.
Yes, yes. You're getting me excited, David. You're getting me excited. Uh, But what is exciting to debate about across the entire sports landscape is who the top 10 of college football is at this time. So we're going to go through 1 through 10 and give our selections for that. We're going to make a combined effort to have a 1 through 10 for Total Sports Talk, and y'all can debate us. Just do so in the comments and like and subscribe this episode, and let's go. David, we'll start with, we'll just start at the top. Number one. I think we can have some agreement here, but I'll go ahead and let you say it.
I mean, it's no question, Ed. It's Georgia. Okay. They got the guy who is probably going to be the top pick in the 2025 draft in quarterback Carson Beck. You can always count on Georgia being elite at the lines. Kirby Smart is the best coach in college football now that Saban's gone. Man, I mean, if there's any quote unquote weakness on Georgia, it's probably the fact that their defense is probably not going to be as good as we're accustomed to, like they're probably not going to be as good as we're used to seeing them, but they're still going to be damn good, man. I mean, there's really just, and even that is stretching it a little bit to say that their defense is going to be their weak point, man. This is easily the best team in college football. And I'm sure you have more to say, man, but I don't think there's much to discuss since I assume you agree with me here.
I do agree, but I will kind of clarify a point that you made. When talking about Georgia's defensive line, it's not that they're getting worse. It's it's like the difference between getting an A plus and getting an A. It's just a minute difference. It's still top of the class, and they are the class of the SEC on the defensive line. There's no question about it, and they're number one in hearts and minds across the country. And as we get into the number two team uh, in the top 10, I'll let you say it. I think I know where you're going with this based upon our previous episodes. But who you
Yeah,
going with at number two?
Yeah, Ed, I mentioned it before, but my number two team is Oregon. All right. I've said before, and I'll say it again here, that I do think Ohio State has the better overall roster. I think Oregon has the better quarterback. I will absolutely take Dylan Gabriel over Will Howard. Okay. And excuse me, I will always take the team with the second best roster, in its respective conference. Okay. I will always take the team with the second best roster, but has the best quarterback over the team that has the best overall roster, but with a quarterback that I'm not even sure is top three or top four in that conference. So
And here we go. Here we go. I'm taking Ohio State. I'm taking the
yeah,
Buckeyes.
yeah, I had a feeling number one was going to be the only one you and I agree on Ed, so far.
I've got the Buckeyes. They are so loaded at every position across the board. And Chip Kelly is a witch when it comes to game planning offense for a quarterback and the skill set that that quarterback brings. He can get the Will Howard can get the ball to anybody on the field in the space that Chip Kelly is going to provide, and just let the athletes be athletes. They are the second best take over the offense under Ryan Day, who is coaching for his life this year. He may have the highest winning percentage of any coach in FBS right now, but he has got to beat Michigan before he wins a national championship, and he is coaching for his life to do just that. And for the fire that is underneath his seat right now, it's going to be an all-out assault on every team that they play this year.
Yeah, no, I think you make a great point, Ed, and certainly, it's really hard to argue against the Buckeyes being number two, especially because other than Georgia, Ohio State is the most loaded team in the country. But again, we go back to the quarterbacks. Now, I do think that Ohio State's receivers are better than Oregon's, even though Oregon's receivers are certainly no slouch at all. But I think, at the end of the day, I don't trust, like, if Will Howard has a bad game, okay, and every quarterback has a bad game or two, okay. If Will Howard ever has a bad game, then it's like, well, then how are the receivers going to step up? Now, I understand that they're athletic enough to kind of, compensate for how bad that Will Howard is going to play. But with a guy like Dylan Gabriel, again, even though I think Oregon's receivers are worse than Ohio State's, I think Dylan Gabriel is just, such a good quarterback that even his bad days are still going to be better than Will Howard's bad days, in my opinion.
And that is totally fair. The issue that I run into is exactly what you said. Every quarterback has a bad game. So the game that Dylan Gabriel has a bad game, you're going to have to beat a roster that's better than you. And if your roster isn't at that level, you're not going to beat them. And in the case of Will Howard, if he does have a bad game, then the rest of the team can cover that up to about 90%, as opposed to what Oregon's roster would be able to do, which is still a really great roster. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this discussion. But if we're basing it solely on just the one player, Dylan Gabriel, that didn't really win anything in Oklahoma, or Will Howard, who was on the team that helped win the Big 12 the year that TCU went to the national championship game, I would take the full roster versus the highlighted player.
Fair.
So I'm going to assume that number 3 is a direct opposite of
Yeah.
what we just discussed.
Yeah, pretty much, man. Ohio State's number 3 for me, so pretty much for all the reasons that you stated, and for the sake of conversation, I'll add another thing or two. I mean, I think one big advantage that Ohio State has over another big advantage that Ohio State has over Oregon is the fact that Ohio State obviously has way more experience in the Big Ten, and that has to count for something. I think Dan Lanning has built Oregon to be Big Ten tough, but they're the newcomers, along with all those other teams entering the Big Ten. So experience has to count for something, and so that's definitely a major advantage that Ohio State has over Oregon.
I think you're exactly right. Last year it was talked about, oh well, Dan Lanning is trying to make Oregon look like an SEC team. Well, now that they're in the Big Ten and not the SEC, now everybody's saying, oh well, he made them look like a Big Ten team. So to me, I think that's a funny way of how the narrative has changed for Oregon. But you're right. They are tougher than what a lot of people give them credit for in the conferences that are more established
hmm
than those teams that broke off from the now somewhat defunct Pac-12 coming into these new conferences. So I'm with you on that. And like I said before, the roster is good enough to beat damn near everybody in the country. It's just those other two. And when you're looking at these, in my mind, I'm looking at this like, would Georgia beat Ohio State? Yes. Would will Ohio State beat Oregon? I think so, and we're going to find out. That's the beauty of this massive conference thing is the schedules are out. We will see these games really take place this year, and I couldn't be more thrilled to have such a importance an important game in the middle of the season between two of the biggest powerhouses in the country, which that was only held to SEC standards until you got to the game once a year. Now we're going to see it consistently through the season, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, and keep in mind, it wasn't that long ago that the Big Ten was considered to be one of the weaker power conferences in football, like being better than only the ACC. So it's really stepped up just in terms of overall conference strength in the last few years.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that narrative had to do with the how weak of a non-conference schedule that the conference had as a whole. I I can't really think off the top of my head how many top 10 matchups out before this year you saw from the Big 10 and non-conference.
Yeah,
And this year we're going to have Michigan versus Texas. We're going to see the Oregon State and Oregon game. We're going to see the Michigan Ohio State. Well, I'm sorry. Uh, the Ohio State Oregon game, the Ohio State Michigan game. Michigan, uh, they've got not an easy walk themselves. So it's certainly worth noting that they are playing better competition being in their own conference now and not just relying on the out of conference, which made them look weak for many years.
yeah, absolutely. And then just one final thing I want to say about Oregon, and then we'll move on. But I think um, in my lifetime of watching college football, um, I think Oregon moving to the Big Ten under every other coach they've had. So Chip Kelly, Mario Cristobal, Willie Taggart. I'm sure there's Mark Helfrich, and I'm sure there's a guy that I'm missing. I think under any other coach, moving Oregon to the Big Ten would be a horrendous idea. But I think under Dan Lanning, again with how he's built that program, I think it's an excellent idea to move them there.
Yeah, timing is everything in this world, and the timing couldn't be better for these teams attaching themselves to the Big Ten and having Texas and Oregon, I mean, Texas and Oklahoma attach themselves to the SEC. To
Hmm.
have it all happen at once, it to me is so much better than two teams this year and then two teams the next year and then two teams the next year. Just go ahead and rip the band aid off and let's get moving.
Yeah.
And as far as getting moving goes, uh, David, who do you got for number 4?
I have Alabama for. Um,
Okay.
yeah, I think even like they don't have Saban anymore, obviously, but that's still an excellent roster overall. Still a top 5 roster in the country. I think Jalen Milroe is primed to have a big year. We talked about last year how he kind of got off to a bit of a slow start, but excuse me, really took off running second half of the season, and so I expect him to continue that momentum into this season, and also with Alabama. I think you're always going to see good defense from Alabama. I mean, I don't think we'll ever see an elite level defense from Alabama. Like we saw from the early 2010s. I mean, those Alabama defenses in the 2010s, early 2010s especially, were just monstrous. And I don't think they'll ever get to that level again, particularly because the man who is a huge driving force into making them elite isn't there anymore, as he's the head coach at Georgia now. But it's still Alabama, and you're guaranteed to see good defense from them, Ed. So yeah, they'll take a step back per Alabama standards, but they're absolutely a top 5 team still, and they're number 4 in my book.
Okay. I'm taking the Rebels. I'm going Old Miss. There is too much good going on uh, down. Uh, I don't want to say the Bayou because we think of LSU, but in the Delta, if you will.
The Delta, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good description.
Uh, Down in the Delta with Lane Kiffin, with Jackson Dart, there's just so much talent there that has been formed and made cohesive. And not only talent that Lane Kiffin brought in through recruitment, but through the transfer portal. They got some monsters over this offseason and in key positions that you don't have to have that big of a repertoire of the system that you're running. You just need to let these animals get out there and just chase it down and do the job. And I think they are a just a fraction ahead of a couple of other teams that we'll be talking about. But Ole Miss, I've got it number 4. Now, moving on from that, uh, I have your pick of Alabama at number 5. Uh, with Kalen DeBoer going into Tuscaloosa, I think he is definitely focused on the offensive side, whereas Saban was focused on the defensive side, which means that after Saban left, there was the opening for transfers out of the program. And there were a couple of guys that took the opportunity to transfer out, specifically in the defensive secondary. That defensive secondary can be exposed without without an improvement that they didn't have last year. So it's kind of a wait and see for that. And Nick Saban has pointed it out himself that he expects Alabama to have a deficiency in the defensive secondary that an Ole Miss doesn't have right now. So that's part of the reason why I have them, uh, slotted behind Ole Miss at this point. Kalen DeBoer is more focused on the offense, and he's specifically focused on that offensive line. That offensive line that he had in Washington, that he had at his previous stop, they were all monsters for the talent that they were allowed to get, able to recruit, all that. I'm I'm curious to see how well he takes the talent of a place like Alabama on the offensive line and makes them such a cohesive unit to give Jalen Monroe the time and the opportunity to really showcase what he can do in his offense.
Yeah, well, when you guys played Washington in the college football playoff semifinal, I mean, the Washington offensive line, I mean, forget about Michael Penix not being touched. I'm not sure he was even breathed on. Like, that's how good Washington's offensive line was that game.
Yeah, and with first rounders on the defensive line for Texas,
Yeah.
and they couldn't get close to him. He was that good in that offense. But who do you have at number 5?
Well, Ed, this is hilarious because much like our 2 and 3, our 4 and 5s here are swapped. So number 5, yeah. So our from a certain point of view, our top 10 so far is unanimous, sort of. But I got Ole Miss number 5, man, for pretty much the reasons that you gave. I mean, Jackson Dart is obviously huge for them, and you're right. Ole Miss has a monster transfer class. They have by far the best transfer class in the country, highlighted by uh, who's that guy they got from Texas A&M? Walter Nolan, I think. Or
I'm terrible at the names in the transfer portal. There were way too many of them.
it's all good. I think it was Walter Nolan if I remember correctly. But even still, obviously they're bringing in a monster class. And just, did you ever think, Ed, that there would be a time where Ole Miss is considered to be among the elites? I mean, maybe in the Hugh Freeze era, maybe, but even like then, that seemed too good to be true. And then, of course, it did end up being too good to be true. I mean, in my lifetime, I never ever thought I would see an era of college football where Ole Miss is considered to be among the elite teams.
Ole Miss, in my mind, has always been that almost team.
Mm.
They're almost there, but never taking the leap to become part of the discussion of being one of the 5 or 6 best teams in college football without question.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely.
And for number 6, I'm gonna have this will be where controversy comes in. I've got Michigan. I've got Michigan coming in at number 6. And the reason being the consistency through turmoil that program has gone through, that everybody that was on that team last year through the national championship, they are they are there. They know what they've been through, the hardship that they went through with everything being against them. It was us against the world. And here they are a year later. Donovan Edwards is going to be your feature back finally. And yes, you have a quarterback that is not proven, but as we saw last year, the Michigan offense isn't really based upon the quarterback controlling the game so much as their offensive line, their running backs, the defense, everything except the quarterback, which Alex Orji, who has been named the starter, he is a exceptional talent and has some skills that uh, JJ McCarthy absolutely did not have. So that's just going to add a new element to that offense. I know it's a bit of a stretch for some people for Michigan to be at number 6, but that's based upon some of the developments at one or two other programs. I've got them slotted at number 6.
So before I reveal my number 6 team, Ed, I think I respect your take, but not only not only is Michigan not my number 6 team, I don't have Michigan in my top 10. And as a matter of fact, I think of all the top 10 teams in the AP top 10, I think Michigan has the best chance to drop out of the top 10 easily because they don't have JJ McCarthy anymore. Okay, they went through a perfect storm last year, and I'll explain more of that in just a little bit. And more importantly, they don't have Jim Harbaugh. Okay, and I don't care about how Sharon Moore led them through turmoil and whatnot. Okay, Sharon Moore coached them using Jim Harbaugh's blueprint. Okay, we don't know what a true voice crack. Excuse me. We don't know what a true Sharon Moore coach team looks like, Ed. And I talk about the perfect storm, and I think the problem with teams going through perfect storms, and we see that happen often. We saw it with
Mm-hmm.
Auburn in 2010. We saw it with LSU in 2019, right? Well, you know what storms do? They pass. Okay, they don't go on forever. And last year, pretty much everything on the field that could go right for Michigan went right, and it was just such a perfect season for them. Literally perfect, but such a perfect season for them that I just don't see them replicating them that this year. I'll give you a chance to respond to that if you want before I reveal who my number 6 team is.
It's a fair point, and I I understand where you're coming from with that. But what I want to take a look at is the identity of a program. What I've said on this show consistently is culture comes from the top down. A culture of winning comes from the top down. And their culture at Michigan right now is, even with Jim Harbaugh jumping ship, even with the loss of so many draft picks this past season, that culture that is in that building right now is one of the best in the country. And that is something that will get you through those times in which you feel like the storm has passed. That is something that you can use as a backbone for moving forward and proving to everybody that you are still him. You are the defending national champions. You did not lose your entire program. All you lost What you lost was a head coach and some players. Well, guess what? They've been recruiting like crazy and they have reloaded for this season. And you're right. We have to see what Sharon Moore does with the program as after Jim Harbaugh leaves, because I have seen it as a Texas fan in our basketball program. Taking over for somebody else's program temporarily versus running it yourself are two totally different things. So I actually have faith in Sharon Moore to do the job, We just got to see it on the field.
That's all fair. So anyway, Ed, my number 6 team is. Why don't you go ahead and give the hook 'em? I actually almost had Texas number 5 over Ole Miss, but ultimately I put Ole Miss over them just because Ole Miss having more experience in the SEC, and generally speaking, I'm almost always going to give the benefit of the doubt to the team with more conference experience in this case. But I think you guys got a great roster. I think Quinn Ewers, I know he gets hurt a lot. You know about that more than I do and more than Matthew does. But I think Quinn Ewers has proven himself to be an effective quarterback. So yeah, I almost had Texas in my in my top 5, but I have them on the border at number 6.
Yeah, and it's funny you should say that because I have Texas at number 7.
There we go
So
again, the old switcheroo.
the old switcheroo. And the great thing about this order is we get to see in week 2 how this plays out. We don't have to wait a long time, wait till the end of the year like the old BCS era to see how two teams actually play against each other. We don't have to wait until a New Year's Six bowl game. This is something that's going to happen before our eyes, before conference play, before any of this other stuff about revenge games at the Red River Shootout or the revenge game of Georgia coming into Austin in the middle of October. We get this week 2, and it is going to be massive. It is going to be a catapult for whoever wins that game into the college football playoff, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for number 7, you have?
Penn State.
Okay.
Yeah, I have Penn State at number 7. Man, I absolutely don't think Penn State is a top 5 team, but I think they have a roster that's worthy enough to be top 10. I think James Franklin, even though he cannot beat ranked teams, top 10 teams, like he can't beat good teams to save his life. But against every other team, against the bad to below average to
Mm-hmm.
average teams, okay, nobody is better than James Franklin at beating the teams. Nobody's better than James Franklin at beating the teams you're supposed to beat. All right,
Mm-hmm.
and Drew Aller, I think he had a statistically, he had an excellent year last year just because I think he threw 25 touchdown passes and only 2 interceptions. Okay? I don't care what you think. Overall, that is an excellent year. Now I understand that he didn't play the best, particularly against the good teams that Penn State played, okay? So I understand that his statistics need to be taken with a little grain of salt, okay? But overall, I think Penn State has a good enough roster, good enough coach to be top 10.
I I see where you're going with that, and you're absolutely right. Penn State has been the program that is helped most by losing divisions, but also hurt most by losing divisions
Yeah.
because now they're susceptible to playing the top teams in the others, what would have been the other side of the conference starting this year. And how they respond to that, that's what we're going to have to see out of James Franklin's team and Drew Aller and a Manny Diaz less defense since Manny Diaz took the job at Duke. That's a whole new defense of system, and how they react to it. That's going to be a big part of it. They can recruit, they can get athletes, and they can beat the living tar out of the teams that they're supposed to be beating the living tar out of. Uh, but when it comes to a team that they know is tougher than they are, that's when they start to get shell shocked and kind of go turtle on them getting your arms and legs into the shell so you don't get hurt instead of attacking that other team.
Yeah.
Just the way that you've seen them against Michigan and Ohio State the past couple of years. Every time they go against those guys, it has just been nope. And you really have not been able to see Penn State even show the fight that's necessary to beat a team that they know is better than them.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think the best chance they had by far at sweeping Ohio State and Michigan was, I think it was 2016, the year that Saquon Barkley went off.
Mm-hmm.
If I remember correctly, I think they did beat Ohio State, but then lost to Michigan. I mean, it's been 8 years. I don't remember. But if that's the year I'm thinking of, I think that was their best chance at doing some damage. And then just real quick, Ed, you talk about Penn State not probably benefiting more than any other team when it comes to not having divisions. And Ed, I don't know about you, you'll probably agree with me, but I am so glad that we're done with divisions. Like, I know we're not completely done with them, but I am glad that we're in the direction of just getting rid of them, because like if you have a year where you have a conference with two divisions, and one conference has 3-4 teams that go 10-2, 9-3, but unfortunately three of those teams can't make it, and then meanwhile in the other division you have that first place team go 8-4, and that team gets a chance over the other teams in that other division, just because the teams in this team's division were all just terrible. And yeah.
Yeah, I give the SEC example. Georgia was able to go through a schedule in which they got to beat up Vanderbilt, Kentucky, South Carolina every single year. Alabama, who did they have to play every year? They had to play Auburn, they had to play LSU, they had to play Ole Miss, and Arkansas when they're good. It's it was just such a different schedule when you were talking about divisions in the SEC.
Yeah.
It took 9 years for Texas A&M to play Georgia in conference.
Yeah, and you want to talk about the examples of the obvious discrepancy between the SEC East and the SEC West. I remember when we won back-to-back SEC East titles under Jim McElwain, and that was primarily because the SEC East was just so pathetically weak back then, and we got our asses handed to us by Alabama in back-to-back SEC championship games. So those were not fun days for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Why don't you tell the people who you got at number 8, though?
All right, number 8, I have Notre Dame, Notre Dame.
And why is that?
I mean, really, just one reason. Well, maybe a couple reasons actually. I think Notre Dame was always guaranteed to have a decent season, have a 9 to 10 win season, and I like Riley Leonard. Riley Leonard. I think he was one of the best transfer pickups of the offseason. So don't really have much explanation for Notre Dame being top 10. I think they are. I think they solidly belong in the top 10. But what say you?
Notre Dame. We have agreement.
Finally.
Hallelujah. Uh, so for me, with Notre Dame, they have an identity. They know exactly who they are. The fact that they got Riley Leonard, which I think is actually an upgrade over Captain Handsome last year, is there. But the only question mark I have for him is how ready is he after the injury that cut his season short last year? That's the only question mark I really have for this team, because you look at a Notre Dame schedule, it's always going to have these teams that they should be beating pretty soundly. You're going to have some ACC. You've got your nationally televised rivalry games. But what you don't have is a conference to lean on for the extra bonus points it takes to get higher up in the standings. Yes, you can beat everybody 40 to nothing, but if all those teams are Navy and Army and USC without a quarterback or a defense, then nobody's going to care. So, yes, Liberty did that last year and wound up in a New Year's Six Bowl, and look what happened to them. They became the pavement of which the steamroll came across the street. It was horrific.
To be
But
honest, Ed, I totally forgot about that game between Oregon and Liberty.
exactly, because nobody wants to remember that game except Oregon fans.
Right? Yeah.
I think Liberty just deleted that off of their webpage after we said it. So uh, Notre Dame, we both have them at number 8. For me, it is in that stage where there's the obvious tier 1 group and they are obvious tier 2. And the reason why I have Texas at number 7 is in losing 2 running backs that were going to be contributors this year, I think is a reason to have question marks, especially after what Steve Sarkisian did game planning with Washington after things got out of control in the first half of that game. I've consistently had questions about his coaching style, being too aggressive and being too much in his head, and I think losing those 2 running backs with Quinn Ewers' injury history, the number of players that they've are having to have step up and transfer in to fill the gap of all the draft picks out of Texas. That is why I put them at 7. Notre Dame, they didn't have near as many draft picks. They didn't have near all that, but with what they do have is a head coach that knows his players, knows his system, has built the culture. It's just what kind of athlete are you getting at Notre Dame at this point that you are not getting in the SEC or the Big Ten?
Yeah.
So at number 9, I'm going to slot in something that you absolutely don't want to hear there, David. Oh,
I think I'm getting an ear bleed. And I just had another voice crack. That's lovely. That's 2 voice cracks in one recording.
So I've got Florida State, and if for nothing else, I think they have the best roster and a team that's on a mission to prove themselves this year after getting shunned last year by not having their quarterback when it came to selection committee time.
That's fair. My number 9 team, Ed, is I got Utah at number 9. Because listen, I think Mike Norvell has proven himself to be an excellent head coach, which is funny because a few years ago I would have called Mike Norvell a complete joke, but he's certainly proven a lot of people wrong the past couple of years. So if there is any good reason for Florida State to be in the top 10, it is because of Mike Norvell. But I don't think DJU is that good of a quarterback. All right, I don't think he's terrible, but I don't think he's good enough to lead a top 10 team. But we'll see, man. But I got to give the edge to Utah here at number 9 because their head coach, what's his name,
Paul
Uh,
Whittingham.
Kyle Whittingham, thank you. Because the combination of Kyle Whittingham and Cam Rising, who's returning for his 15th season, okay, like you can't. It's hard to beat a combination like that.
And I'm totally with you on that. Uh, Utah going into the Big 12, to me, they are the clear class of the Big 12, and you get, say, teams 3 through 10 in the Big 12, they're all the same team.
Mm.
They are all about the same level. I'm leaving a little bit of space for either Kansas State or Arizona or Oklahoma State to prove themselves, but I think Utah is better than all those, which is why I have them at my number 10.
Okay. And my number 10, Ed, I've got Missouri. And Missouri has an absolutely pathetically easy schedule. And that's part of the reason why I have them number 10, because they have the schedule to win 10 or even 11 games. I mean, they got Brady Cook returning. They've got a good, they've got a good overall roster. So yeah, give me the Tigers, Missouri Tigers at number 10. I almost had Tennessee in my 10 spot, Ed, because I think Nico is going to be a freaking stud. But I always have to give the edge to the experienced quarterback in Brady Cook over Nico. And so that's why I put Missouri over Tennessee at number 10.
Mizzou having Brendan Cook come back, that's huge for them. And like you said, schedule is part of this. So, in looking at the schedule, I I trust Cook to cook, if you will, uh,
Yeah.
through that schedule. Whereas Nico, we still want to know, is he him? We we all believe he's him, but we need to see that he's him before we put him there. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely.
So, just quickly going through what we've just discussed, we've got Georgia at number 1. We have flip flopped Ohio State and Oregon 2 and 3. Ole Miss, Alabama at 4 and 5. Uh, Texas, you've got them at 6. I've got them at 7.
Mm-hmm.
I've got Michigan at 6. You don't have them in your top 10. You've got Penn State, so we both have a whatever Big Ten representative
Yeah.
uh, in that slot there. We agree on Notre Dame, and then we've got Florida State and Utah at number 9, respectively, whereas I have Utah at number 10, and you have Mizzou.
Yep.
So, for all those that want to have that discussion with us, put it in the comments. Let's go. Uh, now, the way that we watch these games coming up, watch football this fall coming up, just changed. There was a shift in the landscape of who's going to be on your TV when football is on. And that's because ESPN has decided to let go of RG3 and Samantha Ponder. Samantha Ponder was the host for NFL Countdown, and RG3 was just demoted from Monday night, uh, so they could put Jason Kelsey on in his place. Now, David, are you are you believing ESPN when they say that this is a cost cutting measure?
I mean, I think that's at least part of it, but I think there's also plenty more that they're not telling us, Ed.
I I would certainly think so, because for one, Samantha Ponder is now the second host that ESPN that I've seen be let go after defending the issue of men and women's sports. And it's easy to say that it's a cost cutting measure to let somebody go, but you don't do that 3 weeks before the NFL season takes place. That, to me, that is not a smart move to now just insert whoever toes the company line here,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because it has been, in my opinion, somewhat obvious that ESPN wants things said a certain way, and Sam Ponder went against that, and all of a sudden she's without a job. That I that is not something that I can say is a coincidence.
Yeah, and also like when it comes to RG3, okay, I don't know what RG3's political beliefs are. I mean, if I had to guess, I think I think he's probably maybe a little more left leaning when it comes to men and women's sports. So I don't think he and Sam Ponder agree on that particular topic. Again, I'm just speculating here, but it's obvious to me that RG3 has some views or just has some opinions that ESPN doesn't like because I kid you not, literally after he got let go, he had a tweet that basically said, no job is worth selling your soul for. All right. And you cannot tell me that that was not an obvious, subtle shot at his now former employer.
Yeah, and personalities like his, anybody that's been let go from the flagship, as they call it, they've all had something to say about how it's being run at this point.
Yeah.
Anywhere from Dan Patrick to Sage Steele, now to Sam Ponder, now to RG3, they've all had something to say. Now, in RG3's case, I think it was an easier way to lessen the blow of letting go of Sam Ponder because RG3, like I mentioned, has recently been taken off of the count Monday night desk uh,
Yeah.
and been replaced. So where does he go? Why are they paying his contract for him not to be the guy that they were all promised when he first showed up at ESPN? His commentary has been somewhat off color at times, but it's been tolerated. It's been a little bit out there, and there are some things that should not have been said, some terminology that has not should not have been said on air because that is not the world that we live in at this point. But he's been allowed to stay up to this point, and I don't think that him being let go is uh, not exclusive of them trying to lessen the blow of saying that it was a larger cost cutting measure
Yeah.
by letting go of more than just him.
Well, and also like when it comes to RG3, because yeah, you're right. Like some of his commentary was just so bad. Like there were moments where he would say something, and I would just feel like, oh my gosh, like getting secondhand embarrassment from the things that he said. But from his perspective, I can kind of understand wanting to take the approach of trying something different, trying to cork it up, if you will.
Mhm.
And I don't know. I know some people liked it, man, but I just was not feeling it at all.
Well, and now we're seeing personalities that are at ESPN that are speaking out uh, in the same way that Sam Ponder did. One is sticking to his guns, and another one is, I would say, cowering, if you will. And I'm speaking about uh, a tweet that was deleted by one Dan Orlovsky, former quarterback of in the NFL, quarterback analysis for that network. He said in a tweet, "Protect our daughters," which is a the a clear viewpoint when talking about a what is now considered not a safety issue but a narrative issue, I and to have him turn around and delete it 46 seconds later.
It, he deleted it like immediately afterward.
Uh-huh.
Oh my gosh! Like I thought it was a day later. I didn't realize that he deleted it almost a minute later.
Yes. And but as we all know, the internet is forever, just like what we're saying now.
Yeah,
um, and for him to take that down so quickly, to me, says that you don't necessarily believe it enough to risk the your employer not keeping you around. Uh, and his so-called um, what's the word reasoning behind this is, well, it doesn't match the values of what ESPN is at this point. And I think that is the most BS comment, but still the most truthful comment that he could have made. Because, one, it's BS that you didn't stand behind what you said. And two, you work for a company that wouldn't believe protecting your daughters is a good thing. It is, it's asinine to me to think that that is the way that these personalities have to live their lives when they absolutely see that something is wrong, when they see young girls having to be on teams that play against boys that have a clear physical advantage over them. So that to me is terrible. Now on
Mhm.
the flip side, Kirk Herbstreit absolutely agreed that it is dumb to think that men should play against in women's sports and nothing happened with him. He may have gotten a talking to behind closed doors or a private meeting of some sort, but his comments stand, and he is willing to stand behind those comments. So at this point, I'm respecting Kirk Herbstreit even more so, whereas Dan Orlovsky, not so much. Uh,
Yeah.
David, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, first off, Dan Orlovsky, like I thought Dan Orlovsky was one of the very, 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 very few people at ESPN who still had a spine, but obviously I was wrong about that. And when it comes to the issue with with men and women's sports, like I understand it's a topic that a lot of people don't like to touch, but in the example of Will Thomas, man, like when you have someone who came like 400th, 450th place, just did terrible all around, and with the men, and then he just completely dominates the women's competition. I mean, I don't care how liberal you are on this issue. How can anybody even be okay with that? And actually, to I think to all of our delights, I saw that most people, a lot of people, whether you're right, left, or in the center, a lot of people saw that. Pretty much everyone saw that and was like this is not okay. How can anybody be okay with this?
Yeah, and to take it a step further, ESPN has officially said that their policy is that they do not delve into politics.
Wait,
I
you're serious?
I laughed just as hard when I saw that. And when you take a look at some of the other personalities that they have and the nature of their comments, there's no issue with those people and what they have said, such as uh, claiming that uh, a certain governor is a member of the KKK, or Abraham Lincoln is a racist, or uh, calling a certain politically leaning group of women skanks. That's okay. But to say to protect your daughters, that doesn't fall in line with the values of the company that you work for.
Yeah.
That is so totally opposite. And the worst arbitrator of this is Mina Kimes. I will call you out by name, Mina. You are now an analyst instead of a reporter. You are 98 pounds soaking wet and have no idea what you're talking about, but yet you are on NFL Live every day trying to tell the public how football is supposed to be played. I don't buy it one iota. But you are willing to kiss the tail end of everybody in that building that thinks, talks, and acts a certain way, and the proof of that is the fact that you not only encourage voters in Los Angeles to vote a certain way on air, but you also have encouraged the the inclusion of uh, Kamala Harris's VP pick going forward on air, and that this is a NFL analyst trying to tell you that the way that a governor does his job, which is completely against what Sam Ponder, Sage Steele, at one point, Dan Orlovsky, and Kirk Herbstreit has said, this is, she wants to back a guy that wants to defund the police, that wants to have abortions all the way up to and including birth. These are extreme positions, but yet it's okay for her to talk about that on air, but not anybody talk about that on their private Twitter feed. That is egregious, in my opinion, and I don't want to see it. It's part of the reason why I refuse to watch ESPN for their analysis. There are a couple of personalities on there that I'm okay with, but there's not a chance in anything that I would be watching any of the programs that Mina Kimes is associated with.
Well, I'm really glad that you said all that, Ed, because I truly do not understand the hype around Mina Kimes whatsoever. I think she is easily one of the most overrated analysts in sports. And not to mention, she can get pretty nasty too. Like I remember she went after this one random guy. Well, I don't know if he was random. Well, at least compared to her, he was random, and I don't remember what she said verbatim, but basically attacked him for his fandom or just something trivial. And I'm thinking like, what the hell is wrong with you? It's like you're always preaching about being tolerant and being nice, and yet here you are just being an asshole to this random fan for no reason, whatsoever. So totally with you on Mina Kimes. I don't know her personally. Is she a nice person outside of Twitter? Yeah, maybe. Okay, but I'm never going to know her personally outside of Twitter, so I can only judge her based on Twitter and just her analysis and whatnot. And I just don't understand the hype about her. And then going back to Dan Orlovsky, Ed, I'm sure you've seen it, but now every time Dan Orlovsky makes a new tweet and I click on it, usually the first posts are protect our daughters, right? And now listen, okay? I think Dan Orlovsky has one daughter. I think he's got 3, 4 kids, one daughter. Do I believe that Dan Orlovsky wants to protect his daughter? Absolutely, yes. I will not question it. I am sure he is a fantastic dad, okay? But the optics of all this is absolutely terrible because he essentially sent a message that the corporate overlords are more important, more valuable to him than his own family. Again, I'm sure he's a great dad, and I am sure he would be willing to sacrifice himself for his daughter. Okay, I'm sure he loves his daughter very much. But again, the optics are just terrible all around.
1000%. And when it, and to just kind of put a bow on it, this is why we want to talk mainly about sports themselves and not politics. But sometimes it just intersects in such a way that we have to talk about it. And when we're done, we get back into the sports. Like now, I want to talk about the FedEx St. Jude Championship that took place today, uh, which is the first leg of the PGA Tour playoffs. And for those that aren't aware that how that works, is there's FedEx sponsored points given to all the golfers through the year. If you're in the top 50, then after this event, you get included in all major events next year, and uh, you you have the opportunity to continue to play on into the playoffs uh, for next week. So this week, they played the St. Jude Championship in Memphis. Next week, they'll be playing the BMW Championship, and the winner of the tournament this week is Hideki Matsuyama. Uh, if that name sounds familiar, when you went to American Daily Press and looked at some of the articles through their sports page, you saw a mention of him winning the Genesis Open earlier this year, uh, being masterful at that tournament. He was 5 strokes ahead going into today and wound up losing the lead in the last 3 holes, but still won the tournament by 2. That is a nut check right there. And go ahead, David.
Yeah, I'm totally going to butcher this quote, but this is basically the real life example of just when I thought things couldn't get worse for you, you turn around and totally redeem yourself. I'm sure you know which one I'm talking about.
Yes, from Dumb and Dumber. You
Yes.
do something like this and totally redeem yourself. Well, that's exactly what he did, because coming from after hole 11 today, he went 4 over for the next 4 holes, which gave up the lead of the championship, which is tied for second and the money, uh, as far as biggest money championships of the year. So, winning this, that's a lot of cash to put in the bank account, especially after he and his caddy were robbed in London after the Paris Olympics.
Yeah.
So uh, he was playing actually without his main caddy, because his caddy is over in Europe trying to get the rest of that case taken care of. But next week he'll be back with Matsuyama in the BMW Championship. Just for just to put a bow on that portion of it, Matsuyama ended at minus 17 for the week. Xander Schauffele and Victor Hovland were at minus 15. Victor Hovland was the player that was beating Matsuyama with about 2 holes to go. And David, have you ever heard the term "you drive for show and you putt for dough"?
Yes. From you, I think, actually.
That's exactly what happened here. Matsuyama hit about a 24-foot putt on the 17th green to take the lead and never look back. It was a gut check of an epic proportion after giving up the entire week's worth of lead in just 5 holes, and it was a nail biting thing to do. There was a lot of drama into the tournament today, but in the end, he became, a winner of 2 of the most lucrative tournaments this season. Uh, this FedEx St. Jude Championship and the Genesis Invitational. So between those two, he made 7.6 million, and not a bad couple of weeks at the office, if you ask me. But David, what I wanted to kind of turn this into, now that we're in the playoffs for the PGA Tour, there's 2 players that have stood out over this season, and we've talked about them on this show: Scotty Scheffler and Xander Schauffele.
Mm-hmm.
And given the differences between each player's resume this year, who would you say has had the best year?
I mean, you got to go with Scotty, man. You know, Scotty the body, Scotty Scheffler.
Okay. And if you're looking at total wins through the season, absolutely go with him. Not to mention, he was arrested after one. during one of those, and he had a kid. So, I mean, just a just a such a big year for him
Yeah.
uh, on tour. But I think the argument comes with the Scotty Scheffler argument is the fact that he only won one major, whereas Xander Schauffele won two. And I'll ask the same question, but I'll ask it this way. Would you trade all the money that you won in the 7 tournaments that you played in, that you won for the year, and got one major? Would you trade that to have 2 majors?
I think, Ed, I think if I was a golfer and I was in that position, I honestly think I would. And the reason why I say that is because I can easily envision myself just, being such a competitor that at the end of the day, it's not so much about the money for me. It's about being the best at the best competitions. So yes, absolutely, I would trade all of those wins for a couple of majors.
Yeah, and the way that I look at it, like the way that I look at it as a correlation is the Braves teams of the 90s. They won the division 14 straight years. They had one World Series championship to show for it.
And even that World Series, Ed, came in the lockout season.
The year after.
It was the year after?
Yeah, 94 was the lockout.
Or sorry, I not lockout. I just meant, it was a shortened season that they won it.
Okay. I
Yeah,
got
that's what I meant.
So take that correlation of the major sports and put this to golfers, and that's kind of where we're sitting. Because through that same stretch, you saw the A's win 2 out of 3. You saw the Twins won in 91 against the Braves. So it's which was their second one in about a 5-year stretch.
Mhm.
So that's kind of where that conversation comes in. What do y'all think? Do you think it's better to have more majors or to have more tournament wins and the paychecks that go with them? Go ahead and answer that question in the comment section. I've asked for a lot of comments. I hope to see them at the bottom of this video. But that's all the time that we have for tonight. We appreciate everybody tuning in, being part of the discussion. And on behalf of David and myself, we are rounding third and we are headed for home.